Hi, welcome to your lecture on genetic disorders. This is the last lecture in the genetics unit. Alterations of chromosome number or structure can cause some genetic disorders, and large-scale chromosomal alterations often lead to spontaneous abortions, and that is the medical term for what we call miscarriages. Or they can cause a variety of developmental disorders, and we will talk about a few of them. So what we're talking about is if something goes wrong during the process of meiosis with the chromosomes separating. If a homologous pair fails to separate, so that in anaphase they don't go apart, instead they stick together and both go to one side and none go to the other, we call that non-disjunction. So homologous chromosomes can fail to separate during anaphase 1 of meiosis, and then that would result in some of your eggs or some of your sperm having an extra copy of a chromosome and others having a missing copy of the chromosome. In non-disjunction, the pairs of homologous chromosomes don't separate normally, and some have extra, both of the chromosomes, and the other has 0 of the chromosomes. This is a picture of it occurring. In this picture on the left, you see non-disjunction occurring in anaphase 1 of meiosis. And in this second picture, you see anaphase 1 happening normally, but non-disjunction happening in anaphase 2 of meiosis 2. And the result from that, if it happens in anaphase 1, then all 4 of the gametes are impacted. So both of these have an extra chromosome. N is the normal number of chromosomes. In humans, that's going to be 23. You have 23 pairs. So if you have one of each in your eggs or your sperm, then you have N, that's 23. N plus 1 is 24. You have 1 extra. N minus 1 would be 22, where you're missing 1. So over here, you only have 2 impacted gametes and 2 normal gametes. So if it happens, it's better if it happens in meiosis 2. It kind of lowers your chances of having those eggs or sperm be fertilized. Aneuploidy results from the fertilization of gametes in which non-disjunction occurred, and offsprings with this condition have an abnormal number of a particular chromosome, either too few or too many. If you have only 1 copy of a particular chromosome, it's called a monosomy or being monosomic. And if you have 3 copies instead of 2 of a particular chromosome, it's called a trisomy or being trisomic. An example of a trisomy, and it is trisomy 13. So the way these are named is when you look at the karyotype and you organize all of the chromosomes here. Here's pair 1, homologous pair 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you get down here to 13 and you see that you have 1, 2, 3 of them. So that makes it a trisomy, tri meaning 3, 3 copies of chromosome number 13. That's why it's named trisomy 13. The other name is Patau syndrome for this one. And down at the very bottom, you see either XX or XY, and then that will tell you if it's a male or female. So in this case, if you were just looking at the karyotype, you can see that you have a female that has trisomy 13. And I do need you to be able to read these in class. So practice looking for the trisomies or the monosomies and whether it's male or female. Some of the symptoms of having Patau syndrome are having a cleft palate. And that's when the palate of your mouth doesn't fuse all the way together. And so there's an opening there, and you can have that fixed surgically. And a lot of times people that were born with a cleft palate or cleft lip, you'll see the scar from the surgery they had to correct it. And if it's not corrected, then it'll just kind of be open there. Fetuses with trisomy 13 rarely go to term. which means when they say go to term, they mean a full term pregnancy that's resulting in a live birth. So that means that if you are pregnant and the baby happens to have trisomy 13, chances are very, very, very high that you will end up having a miscarriage as a result, because the condition is not compatible with life. And there is nothing that anybody can do to prevent that or fix it or stop it. It just happens sometimes. So Patau syndrome occurs only in 1 out of every 6,000 live births. It's rare for babies to survive for very long if they are born alive, because they have so many anomalies. They can have an atrial septal defect, which is a heart condition or a problem in their heart. They can have an inguinal hernia. Hernias are when your intestines are protruding. And they can have polydactyly of the hands and the feet. So polydactyly is having extra digits. If we go back to this slide right here, you can count that the hands on this baby has 6 fingers. Okay, so that's polydactyly. And sometimes cyclopia, so one eye, or the absence of eyes altogether. Edwards syndrome is another trisomy. It's trisomy 18. And the survival rate, again, of this is very low. These large-scale chromosomal defects are catastrophic when they occur. And majority of the time, when you have something like that occur and that egg gets fertilized or that sperm fertilizes an egg, then it is not going to result in a live birth. So approximately 95% of fetuses that have Edwards syndrome die in utero and end up miscarrying. And of the ones that are born alive, only 50% live to be 2 months old, and only about 5 to 10% survive their first year of life. The average lifespan is 5 to 15 days. 1% of children born with this syndrome can live to age 10, and that's typically in cases of less severe Edwards syndrome. They will, again, have heart defects at birth, intestines protruding outside of the body, which are the hernias there, feeding and breathing difficulties, microcephaly. Microcephaly is when micro is small and cephaly is referring to the head. So if you remember all the news about the Zika, the mosquito born illness that was impacting pregnant women and causing microcephaly. It's when babies are born with a small head and a smaller brain. So you're going to have mental impairments and physical impairments as a result of that. And then they're also born with like clenched fists. And so they can't release their fists. They stay that way. So they can't use their hands. Polyploidy is a condition in which an organism has more than 2 complete sets of chromosomes. Triploidy, so we're diploid. We have 2 sets of chromosomes. And there's triploidy, 3N, tetraploidy, 4N, and polyploidy is common in plants. It's not common in the animal kingdom, but plants have it all the time. And if you have an extra copy of all of the chromosomes, then that's just going to result in a normal appearance. And this is normal for plants to have. So an extra of all of them. This is not the same as an aneuploidy where you just have one additional chromosome or you're missing one. It's actually better to have a whole another set in the case of these plants than it is to be missing or gaining one. So alterations of chromosome number and structure are associated with some serious disorders, and some types of aneuploidy appear to upset the genetic balance less than others, resulting in individuals surviving to birth and beyond. And these surviving individuals have a set of symptoms or a syndrome that's characteristic of their type of aneuploidy. And probably the most common one that almost everybody has heard of is Down syndrome. It is trisomy 21. It's an aneuploid condition that results of having 3 copies of chromosome number 21, and it affects about 1 out of every 700 children born in the United States. The frequency of Down syndrome increases with the age of the mother, but we don't know exactly why that is yet. That correlation has not been explained, and that's actually the only correlation that they have found yet as to why Down syndrome occurs. However, because women under the age of 35 have the majority of the babies, and then 80% of Down's babies are born to women under the age of 35, you just are at higher risk the older you are when you get pregnant. And we are talking like 40-year-old women and 38-year-old women at that age when you're pregnant. I think above 35, they call it a geriatric pregnancy. So it just increases your risk of certain things. This is a child that was born with Down syndrome, and this is the example of the karyotype. So if you look here, you see 2 of all the chromosomes, except for when you get to chromosome number 21, you have 3 copies down here at the bottom. And then you have XX, so this is a female with Down syndrome if you're looking at the karyotype. Individuals with Down syndrome have some characteristic facial features that oftentimes make it recognizable. One thing that is important to know about individuals who have Down syndrome, they are capable of living a really full and rich life. Depending on the severity of it, they hold down jobs, they have relationships, they have children. I mean, they can do all sorts of things. So the severity, it's different for every individual, but they need to be looked at and treated as people first, and not just individuals with Down syndrome. They have some of the biggest hearts and some of the most wonderful people you'll ever meet. So if you have a chance to work with them or get to know them, or call somebody with Down syndrome a friend, I mean, do it. It's they're awesome. Aneuploidy of sex chromosomes. So this happens with your X's and your Y's also, and we'll talk about what happens when that occurs. Non-disjunction of sex chromosomes produces a variety of aneuploidy conditions. So Klinefelter syndrome is the result of an extra chromosome in a male producing XXY. Monosomy X, called Turner syndrome, produces females that only have one X. So they have X and then 0, meaning nothing there. That is the only monosomy that is viable in humans. So if you're missing any other chromosome, you cannot survive. The only type of monosomy that you can survive is having only one X. This is Klinefelter syndrome. Klinefelter syndrome is 2 X's and a Y. And so it results in a male who has some more female characteristics. So breast development, sparse facial hair. They can be treated with testosterone injections. A lot of times they're sterile and can kind of range in impact. Sometimes the results of it are not very noticeable at all. And the most common is just the individuals are sterile and have smaller genitalia. It can be treated with some testosterone injections, but a lot of times it'll go undiagnosed. XYY is when you have one X and 2 Ys. And this results in men that are taller than average. A lot of them have like cystic acne, but for the most part, they develop normally. They have normal development of sexual characteristics, normal fertility. Some were thought to be mentally impaired, but it is not dramatic at all. And they used to call it like a super male syndrome and think that males with this were more aggressive and less empathetic and more likely to be in prisons and commit crime. But none of that was true. All of it was stereotypes, and when they actually did studies on it, they found that none of that was valid. And so because these are just like really tall guys, and by the way, not every guy that's really tall has XYY. I believe they also call it Jacob syndrome. But a lot of times, again, this goes undiagnosed, and it really has not very many impacts at all besides like that increased height and sometimes acne. Turner syndrome is when you have only one X. If you have one X and no other sex chromosome, then you are born female, but you don't have developed ovaries. You can have heart problems, webbing of the skin around the neck, some characteristic facial features, poor breast development. So these are very short, infertile females, and 98% of babies that are monosomy X are miscarried. So very few are born live with this syndrome. That is all of the aneuploidy conditions that we will be discussing. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in class.